Welcome back to Market on Close. I'm Marley, Kayden here in Chicago alongside Sam Vadas at the New York Stock Exchange. We'd like to close out today's show with some thoughts on the session today. For me, StubHub is now a publicly traded company, the one in a line of many IPOs we've seen. They opened trading slightly above the offering price of $23.50 per share. The StubHub IPO priced late Tuesday raised about $800 million for the ticket resale marketplace, selling 34 million shares at that price. Now, it closed out its first day on the markets down more than 6% at $22. But this IPO comes as the overall market for new offerings is heating up. Last week was the busiest week we've seen since 2021 with 7 large IPOs. Those included strong debuts from buy now, pay later firm Klarna, Figure, and the Winklevoss twins-led cryptocurrency trading platform Gemini Space Station. Also, we have to talk Nvidia closing the day down more than 2.5% after the Financial Times reported that China has banned tech companies in the country from buying Nvidia's chips. CEO Jensen Huang responded saying he was quote-unquote disappointed that the Cyberspace Administration of China had ordered companies, including TikTok parent company ByteDance and Alibaba, not to buy Nvidia's RTX Pro 6000D chip. Now, that was a chip that was made specifically for the country. Huang said earlier that Nvidia, quote, can only be in service of a market if the country wants us to be. In its most recent earnings, the company also didn't include any of its China sales in its guidance. This is the second blow in as many days for the chip maker as well. Market regulators yesterday said they opened an anti-monopoly investigation into the company over its acquisition of Mellonix back in 2020. Now, Sam, what were some of the things that caught your eye during trading today?
Yeah, well, I think you highlight a really important point there, particularly because this is one of the most important companies that we look at. Nvidia very much on the back foot off the back of that news. But Nvidia's loss, seemingly another's gain, because if you take a look at the Chinese ADRs today, they were ripping off the back of this chip news. So we know that the likes of Alibaba and Baidu are trying to come up with their own chips to very much compete with Nvidia on Beijing's directive. And we've also seen the K-Web hitting a 52-week high today alongside some of those names. So really it has been a China-heavy headline type of day. And, it follows on from a pretty solid overnight session that we saw over in Hong Kong. And that was also around some of the Alibaba news, which probably speaks to what we saw in the ADRs today. State media had been saying that it's also secured a big customer for its chips. And China Unicom, which is a big telco over there, think like an AT&T, slightly different, but you get the picture, will build a massive data center powered by the domestic stuff. So it very much backs this whole self-reliance type of push. But, bringing it back to this part of the world, Marley, obviously you were having a fascinating conversation about the housing market, what these rate cuts are going to mean. Mortgage rates have really been in focus today as well. We've got the average 30-year fixed rate dipping ahead of that rate decision. And the data out earlier had showed that refinancing was actually up as people have really been looking to take advantage of those lower rates given some of the economic uncertainty. Now, of course, heading in tomorrow, we're going to be watching the reaction from the Fed. What are you going to be watching out specifically for, Marley?
I'll be specifically looking for the reaction in the markets to the rate cut decision. It was in line, but beyond that, what sectors are we seeing the most response in? Will the tech stocks start to find their way back up? How will utilities perform? These are usually highly responsive after a rate cut. We've also had several conversations today about the housing market. We just had one as well. So I'll definitely be looking at bonds, seeing what's happening with the yields, with the 10-year specifically. Watching for any kind of sell-off there will be very important, as that will work with mortgage rates there. Could potentially keep buyers sidelined. Also, we'll be getting those initial jobless claims at 8:30, and with the highlighting of the softening labor market today, that was much of Chair Powell's press conference focused on that labor market, the slowdown that we're seeing. Also mentioning some shifts in our immigration policies. So I think a hotter than expected number in initial claims could be a potential market catalyst on the heels of that commentary. Right now, expectations, Sam, are calling for about 240,000 initial claims. How about for you?
Yeah, I mean, the small caps, Marley, particularly off the back of what we saw in the Russell 2K, I mean, really a knee-jerk reaction, spiking almost 2% off the back of that decision. And then as markets sort of came around to the idea of what Powell was actually saying, we saw that coming off. But, small caps have been outperforming lately on these Fed cut expectations. And so no doubt the argument is that they need these rate cuts because of the cost of borrowing on their businesses. So That's going to be really interesting to keep an eye on to see if that rally is sustained, because they still closed out in the green, even though it was fractionally, marginally. We saw an outperformance for the day. But you mentioned, obviously, the macro stuff. We're going to be getting another temperature check on the health of the consumer, no doubts, with Darden earnings. Analysts expecting them to come out with some fairly cautious guidance. I was just speaking to an analyst earlier this morning talking about how they're going to be watching out to see what they say about addressing affordability. We know that they have revamped some of their menus as well. But will that resonate with what we've seen? Marley is a value-hungry consumer right now. And what we've seen throughout the course of this earnings season is very much a bifurcated consumer. And obviously, this is going to be reporting quite late in the season.
Yes, certainly is. But that's going to do it for us today for Market on Close.